I'm Raghu Nandakumara. I'm Senior Director of Solutions Marketing at Illumio, the leader in segmentation. I spent 15 years at Citibank. Sort of in the last few years of that, I was running their first cloud security engineering team. So initially, this is meant to be Michael Adjei. I'm clearly not Michael Adjei. And till I saw Sarah's presentation this morning, this was titled The Day After Mindset, a Modern Cyber Resilience Approach. But then there was something that she said, and I thought, that's a much better title for this session. So I called it, What's Your Safety Net? And you probably recognize this slide from earlier today, right? I promise you, this is the last bit of content that I've stolen from Sarah. The rest of the slides are mine. But why I liked it was because I think the first, it's fantastic. Every bullet I wholeheartedly agree with. And in fact, if you all agree with it, you can all have a break now and get coffee. But I think particularly, the first point is very important, right? How do we think like an attacker? And not because, in order to defend better, we need to think like an attacker, but really because it allows us to provide a much clearer picture on what we need to protect and how we need to protect it, right? So moving away from boiling the ocean to being able to be very targeted and prioritize effectively. But also, what is your safety net came from that last bullet, right? Investing in a technology that acts as a safety net when things go wrong. Why is that important? Because the data shows, and Jonathan, who presented sort of second, right, had this great data, right? And we love data in cyber, so here's some more data points, right? The fact is the problem is just getting worse, right? So, and hence we need to focus on cyber resilience. What is our ability to continue our operations, continue our revenue-generating operations, even in the case of that inevitable cyber attack that is going to impact our organization? And with this, we come onto this concept of the minimum viable operation, the MVO, right? What is that minimum set of processes, of technology, of tools, of people that we need to be functional in order for us to be continuing to be productive? Because if we think about what we mean by resilience, sorry, someone wanted to take a picture, there you go, right? This gives me time to sort of, right, because I like sort of how many people take pictures, and that's a gauge of how good the talk is. So if we think about low resilience organization, right, and we talk about blast radius when it comes to cyber attacks. So how far does the attacker spread? How many things are impacted? But really, when we think about blast radius, we need to think beyond just what are the systems impacted, but what is the overall impact of that attack? And I don't take credit for this diagram. It was taken from something that the World Economic Forum published in, I think, their report towards the end of last year. And if we have this concept of we have normal operation, right, so availability, normal operation at the top, and then we have this line, the boundary of service, which really defines the point below which we're like, oh shit, we're losing money now. This is really impacting our operations. We can't continue to do business. Then, if we think about that cyber attack, right, and again, think about that safety net. If our safety net is weak, if we lack a safety net, what happens? At that point of a cyber attack, we continue, we're struggling to detect, we're struggling to respond, right? That availability is going down, past that point of essentially no recovery, and we're lost and we're drowning. And it takes a while to recover, right? Recover systems, recover data, restore trust. And really, that is the blast radius of the attack, right? That is the circle of disruption that encompasses both the impact to your technology and processes, but also the impact to the revenue. So what is really our objective? When we think about minimum viable operation, we think about cyber resilience, our focus is on how do we reduce the radius of that circle? How do we reduce the area of that circle so that that point of containment is above our boundary of service? So ideally, we never lose service. We may have a degraded service, but we never lose service. But also, our ability to detect and respond and recover is significantly quicker, which means that the overall impact to us is significantly less. And in order to do that, again, tying it back to something Sarah said, right? Thinking like an attacker, but applying this to how we build better defenses. Identifying risk. What is the real risk that we're exposed to? What are the vulnerabilities that we have that attackers could potentially exploit, which we need to address? Let's think about containing the attack proactively. Again, what is that safety net we're going to deploy in advance, but also the ability to deploy it reactively to quickly reduce the potential impact once we've detected something, and ultimately to be able to restore quickly. And why is this important? More data. We love data, right? Because the fact is organizations lack the ability to do this effectively and to do it quickly, which means that we're seeing an increased rise in disruptive cyber attacks. IBM Cost of Data Breach report from 2 years ago said 25% of attacks are disruptive. That number has only gone up. So what is our attitude to risk? And how do we really think about risk? Because we talk a lot about reducing cyber risk, reducing exposure. But what do we mean by that? So let's think about risk, and I'm sure you've all seen some version of this type of sort of heat map, right? We've got the likelihood of the occurrence on the vertical axis. We've got the likelihood of impact on the horizontal axis. So on the left-hand side, on the vertical axis, it's how do I reduce the probability? How do I reduce the probability of an attack, right? And of course, prevention is always really what we should strive for. But we know that prevention is imperfect. And in fact, prevention is getting harder and harder and harder. So really, our focus should be on how do we make that shift in the horizontal axis from the chance of that inevitable cyber attack having a significant impact to having as small an impact as possible. So let's talk about this quickly, reducing the probability. Okay, so over time, going back to 1987, right, we've been investing in different types of preventative controls in order to reduce the probability of a successful cyber attack, right? So how do I keep the barbarians at the gate? How do I keep the attackers away from my environments? And this is kind of what we think we've been doing, right? Right at that far end, we've had sort of firewalls and AV, and we've had sort of other controls that we've deployed over time. So we think that we're getting sort of tending towards zero. That's our assumption. And you've got a bunch of controls here, right? No disrespect to any vendors in the room, by the way. These are all great controls and essential. But if we think about the spending in cyber, right? Hey, and I work for a vendor, and we love it when people spend more on cyber because it means they're going to spend more on vendors like us. So the spend on cyber continues to go up and to the right, right? If anyone disagrees, happy to have that conversation, right? It's going up and to the right. What do you think that the impact of cyber attacks is doing? Is it following this chart, or is it following the spend chart? In fact, it's doing that, right? The cost of a breach is increasing year by year. So we're spending more because we think we're getting it better at prevention to reduce that probability, to take it down to zero, but yet the cost of a breach is going up. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that in reality, our effort to change the probability, to reduce the probability of an attack, to essentially say, I'm pretty good, 100% of prevention, the reality is that it's not close to zero. It's quite a bit above that, which means that we're not really doing much to reduce cyber risk. And again, right, the data shows that. Attackers are not having to leverage new sort of techniques and procedures, right? They're pretty much able to rinse and repeat. Why? Because they're finding the same things that they're able to go and exploit, right? Our safety nets are weak. So we need to rethink about what can we do to reduce risk? So again, let's draw that chart, reducing the probability, right? We've done that. We need to now focus on how do we reduce the impact? How do we ensure that we're able to best protect our minimum viable operations, the things that are most important to us, in order to reduce the impact and thus truly reduce the risk that we have in the environment? So the abstract to this talked about AI, right? And I'm going to just touch on it very briefly. So we think of two things when it comes to AI. As we use AI models increasingly, and they're a key part of our business operations, there is the risks to AI, right? All the various, you're all familiar with those, right? Right from sort of poisoning the model, right? To be able to extract data from the model that we're not supposed to, and so on. And then more and more that is gaining prominence is the risks from AI. How can attackers leverage AI to further advance their attacks? Right from deep fakes to be able to create massively personalized phishing emails to then true sort of like automorphic attacks that are able to leverage the power of generative AI to literally sort of manipulate themselves on the fly. So this generates concerns. It's important. But again, remember, right, what we have to keep in mind is that fundamentally, these are still computer systems and data interconnected in a massive way. So with the rise of AI, either side, the use of AI and the risks associated with how do we protect AI, because it is going to be one of our critical systems, again, tying it back to sort of what is important to us from our MVO, but also the risks associated from AI-powered attackers. The problem, what attackers are looking to exploit is still the same. It's the lack of proper controls, the right controls in the right places that they're able to exploit to continue their attacks. Which is why the adoption of a zero-trust strategy, and whether you want to call it least privilege, whatever you want to call it, if you don't like the term zero-trust, is so important. Because, in my opinion, it really flips the way we think about security. It's almost saying, well, in an ideal world, if I had something to protect, how would I design controls around it to protect it effectively? And there, I think, is a I'm not going to say it's a simple answer, but it's a straightforward answer. I'd ensure that it only had the necessary access around it, and that access could be at the network layer, at the identity layer, whatever it may be, in order for that person, that function, for it to perform its critical function, right? So if we think about zero trust in that way, it's only allowing what you really need. Then you can see the advantage that we have, because suddenly we go from a problem of this, which is, well, everything, right? I have so much excessive permissions in my environment that I'm struggling to figure out, to differentiate between the good and the bad, to be able to say, well, as I continue my journey on zero trust, I'm increasingly reducing the things that I don't need, the access that I don't need. So as I progress on this journey, what I know is that what I have in place is access that I have explicitly allowed, which means that I can focus on monitoring just that to be able to identify what my attacker is up to. And it gives me a significantly better chance of being able to detect and respond. It gives me a much stronger safety net than I had before. So now applying this, right? When you think about zero trust, and we've got sort of zero trust network access on the left-hand side, that is, to me, that's like next generation perimeter, right? It's very much focused on how do I keep the bad actor outside my network, right? And yes, we apply that typically to sort of like thinking about remote access and how we manage how users on sort of devices of all kinds from whatever location are able to get access to our applications. On the other end is zero trust data security, right? Things like immutable backups. How do I ultimately protect that data that is most important to me? In the middle, you have segmentation, right? Which is really about how do I ensure that once I get into my environment, between getting into my environment and ultimately the data that is most important to me, how do I ensure that access is properly monitored, is restricted, so that I'm able to define what are the available pathways and for whom in my environment, which is why segmentation is so essential to being able to build that safety net. It allows us to build the right restrictive controls around our critical assets to be able to protect them for longer, to make them resilient, to make them better resilient, and provide that safety net, whether that is in advance, proactively deploying controls like segmentation around your critical assets, or reactively having the capabilities in place to be able to deploy them at a moment's notice in order to restrict the spread. So tying it all back together, what are the recommendations? Again, I'm going to sort of nod to Sarah's slide, right? It's about thinking like an attacker. So think like an attacker. Understand the real risk in the environment. Understanding the real risk involves understanding what is most important to our organization. What is those critical set of applications, processes, technologies that make us run? Understand the threats associated with them. Define the right security controls to protect them, to build that safety net around them. So when it comes to segmentation, it's understand the risks associated with lateral movement as it applies to that set of systems, and define the right controls to limit access to the system. And then finally, either proactively or reactively, create that safety net to contain the spread of an attack, reduce that circle of disruption, and boost cyber resilience. And if you want to talk about more about how this works, please come and find us at the sponsors booth in the hall next door. Thank you very much.